Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is the art of photography, crafting compelling compositions. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab expedition leader, Giulia Ciampini. Giulia, thank you so much for being here today. Looking at your first image, I can't wait to dive deeper into your presentation. So let's get started.
Thank you so much, Sunny. Can everyone hear me?
You sound great.
Amazing. My name is Giulia Ciampini, and I'm a professional photographer, a photography teacher, and an expedition leader. For NatHab, I guide in Churchill, in polar bear season, belugas, and northern lights. I also guide in about 30 different countries, and I come to you today with a background as a teacher with an honors Bachelor of Science, Masters of Science, and a Masters of Fine Arts in Documentary Photography. Really, thank you for coming today. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm excited to talk about photography composition with you. It's such a wonderful topic. For your information, my Instagram and website are here. But let's dive into our topic because we don't have as much time. So today we'll talk about photographic composition, what it is and why it's important. And I'll give you some compositional tools to help you emphasize your subject, to help you lead the viewer's eye around the screen, to help you create movement, all that energy and that excitement that's held up in movement. How can we use that and create that? And how to add depth to our scene. And then I'll do a little wrap up. I will say with composition, you can have a whole university course devoted to composition and still not even scratch the surface. So there's so many topics that I don't get to dive into today: light, color, storytelling elements, and those all I will save for another day. But we'll start with what is composition and why is it so important? So if you look at the definition in the dictionary, there are two that are usually given. The first is a composition is the placement or arrangement of visual elements in a work of art. And the second is usually act of combining parts to form a whole. But when I think of this, I think of very much how do we organize our frame and how do we create meaning from that organization. So here's more what I mean. When you enter a messy room, it's disordered. You don't know where anything is. You don't know where you should look. You don't know where you should step. Your first instinct is you want to get out of there as quickly as possible. There's absolutely no order. This is the same as a picture that doesn't have compositional order. It's not arranged. Contrast this now to a beautifully ordered scene. It's well organized. Everything has its place. Each element has a specific place. You can sit, you can relax, you can rest, you can move throughout this space. And if you contrast the two, of these two, which is more welcoming? Which will you stay in longer? You're going to stay in the more organized space. So good composition, like a well-ordered room, will encourage the viewer to really take time. It shapes the viewer's experience of the artwork, and it really does affect mood and perception of the image. So it's a very, very fundamental and important part of photography. As a photography teacher, some of the common issues that I see with photographers is they'll come to their images and they'll, shoot very quickly. They'll shoot without thinking, or they'll take one shot and then very fast move away. Or if they're shooting, they might shoot from the same point of view, the same vantage point, same distance from the subject. All their shots look very similar. Or they're not shooting with any care or intention. These are the most common problems I see. And these are typically easier problems to solve. It's just a matter of, really slowing down, seeing what's in front of you and taking your time with that subject. And with any subject, you can approach it from such a wide variety of angles. As a photographer, you have so many decisions that you could be making. Where are you standing in relationship to your subject? How high, how low? Does your subject have additional elements in the frame that help support it? What lenses are you using? How far or how close are you to your subject? All these different decisions make a big, big impact on the final image. So sometimes I compare composition and photography to writing a great essay. If you're clear about what your paper is about, you can choose your words and sentences extremely carefully to support your message. Same with photography, being clear about your subject matter and then choosing what you'd like to include or not include or how you want to frame your image to support the message that you're trying to get at. So I find it very helpful to ask myself these 3 questions as I'm shooting. What is this particular photograph about? What elements do I have in front of me to work with? And how do I best organize those elements to serve my purpose? I always have these questions in mind. So really slow down. There is no rush when you're taking pictures. Your subject might be moving quickly, but you can take the time to think about what you're doing and how you can bring your care and attention to composing the scene in a more meaningful way. So first issue with any image is identifying your subject. What is the image about? Is it a person? Is it a place or a thing? Or is it even a concept? It could be an image about a relationship or a venture or motion. So I'll give you a great example of this. I was in Japan recently on an expedition and I was walking down the street. And this is the scene in front of me. It's a messy, chaotic view, lots of signs, lots of people, lots of chaos. And I'm standing at a street corner and I see a man on a motorcycle and light is hitting this man in a very beautiful way. He stopped at the light and just at the moment where he revs his engine and goes forward, I snap a shot. But to me, this chaotic scene that you just saw, it's not about the motorcycle, it's not about anything, it's about the interplay of light on this person's face. So that's my subject, the way the light is hitting this man. I'm very clear on what my subject is, and so I can hone into that subject, and I can make a more powerful image than I could if I didn't know what my subject was. So I think one very, very powerful compositional tool is to simplify our scene and really get down to the essence of what we're trying to do with that image. So here's another great example. Again, on this Japan expedition, we are at a Buddhist temple and there are a number of people involved in a particular ceremony. And the scene, there's probably, where I'm standing, maybe 100 people. It's, you know, people everywhere. And I'm quite short, I'm 5 feet tall. I can't really get above people, but I'm trying to make a beautiful picture from what's in front of me. And I notice these 2 women in the corner, they're dressed in beautiful traditional garb. And I think, you know, this is where the image is in this whole picture. Can I simplify my scene to make a stronger image? And this is what's behind me. It's just chaos. There's so many people around. But the image is very much about these 2 people in this frame, about their relationship and about what they're doing, this tradition that they're a part of. And so I hone in and I pay attention to them because they're what matters in this image. And then I'm able to get the shot on the right, which I think of the few is the most powerful one. It's the relationship between mother and daughter and the traditions that they share. And so being very clear on your intent helps quite a bit. So another example, in Greece, we were with the class of students and the scene happened where a goat came up to us and the students are all quite excited to see this goat, and our hike guide began to share some of his food with his goat. It is not a wild goat, it's a goat owned by farmers that the hiking guide knew. But when you're in a situation where you're photographing with a lot of people, if you can take a step away from the scene that's in front of you and see if you can get a different perspective, a different angle, it might lead you to a different image and a different meaning. So this is fine and good. It tells the story of that day, but I can maybe make a more useful image that's telling me a story about the relationship between this man and this animal. So that really came about by taking the time to move my body around the scene and vary the vantage points that I'm shooting at. So what are ways that we can emphasize our subject after we know about our subject? Okay, so one of the things we can do is try to isolate our subject within the scene. For example, shooting, if you're a photographer shooting with open aperture, so for example, f2.8, f2.0, this will help blur the background, which gives us a visual separation between our subject in the foreground and the background behind the subject. If you're on your phone and that's your camera of choice, you can mimic this, this look with portrait mode on your phone. And it's a great way to really isolate the subject from its surrounding. And you'll notice in a picture like this, I'm really getting down low to my subject. I'm shooting it from eye level. I'm establishing that connection to my subject by the way in which I position my body. So here's another example. This is a quick shot. This is, you know, that first shot that you might take of a scene, really adorable girl. We've established some kind of rapport. She's giving me high five fingers, peace fingers, I should say. But you'll see there's a lot of things that are wrong with this image. There's a boom stand growing out of her head and the tripod around her legs. There's a car, a man with his iPod, a girl running through the scene, wires. It's a messy scene. It's chaotic. So what can I do as a photographer with my body, with my camera, to simplify and isolate my subject? And so I'll make choices in every shoot that I take to do those things. So for example, I'll move my body to make sure the background is a nicer background. So it's more of her classmates. It's not the car or the sign that's very distracting. Signs or anything with letters or those visuals tend to really draw the eye away from the subject and outside of what your intention is. So I'll also, as I have my camera to my eyes, I will very carefully do a 360-degree check around my frame, right to the peripheral, to see if there's anything coming into the frame that is going to distract me from my subject or distract my viewers from my subject. And again, trying to establish that eye level connection or getting low on a subject that's low. So right away, those few things will make a tremendous, tremendous difference in your images. Similar to having a horizon line that's crooked, the moment you straighten that horizon line, the more harmonious your image will feel. So the more you can eliminate any unnecessary details that do not add to your image, the better your images will be. Just like an essay, if it's long, if it's wordy, and it's never getting to the point, you're going to lose your readers. So clean up those words and make it tight. A photo should be a poem. One great example of something you can do with your images is change your horizon line. Where are you placing the horizon line in your image, essentially? Some images don't have a horizon line. Some might have a very high horizon line, for example, this one, and some might have a very low horizon line. I intentionally chose to shoot this with a high horizon line to emphasize how large this church was compared to the landscape around. Had I shot it lower, you wouldn't get this sense of grandeur here. So this was a very intentional choice. But on the contrary, here's a shot with a low horizon line. Shooting again very intentionally. These surfers were there from early morning to night. And so if I can show sundown, the sunset, this beautiful light, this gorgeous clouds, interesting colors, but the bulk of the image, I'm giving a lot of real estate to the sky. I'm saying that that part of the frame is important. And this kind of image is not so much about the individual surfers, but about the community of surfers that come together. So silhouettes might be a good choice because you're not necessarily showing individual faces, but you are showing people in amongst this big environment. So another way that we can emphasize our subject is filling our frame with the subject. So here's an example of an action scene. I don't think this is as strong of a composition as it could be. The wolf, the second wolf, the one that you can't see its head, I think it really kind of gets in the way of the other three wolves. So I think that's a not necessarily a good part of this image, but to fill the frame with excuse me, my keyboard is quite sensitive. To fill the frame with the wolf itself brings you closer to the subject. So you can do this using a long lens. You might have a telephoto lens or a super telephoto lens, or even an adapter. If you're a photographer, a wildlife photographer, you might have these tools with you. If you're not a wildlife photographer, phones can actually do this kind of thing. Your new phones typically have different lenses, and your different lenses will allow you to maybe shoot wide or shoot tight like this. A lot of photographers coming in, they'll pinch and zoom to zoom in with their phones. That's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is actually employ the lens that is meant to be used to have a zoom, or like a telephoto or reach. So don't pinch and zoom, but choose your long lens if you have it. Okay, so another note about lenses and lens choice, a lot of lenses have a minimum focusing distance. So if your subject gets far too close, it won't be in focus. And this does differ from lens to lens. So it's a good thing to understand where your minimum focusing distance lies with your lens and work accordingly. And then also know that some lenses will allow you to get much, much closer to your subjects than others do. For example, wide angle lenses tend to allow the subjects to come closer. So if you want to shoot in tight environments, or you would like to be closer to your environment, your subject, your wide angle lenses are going to be a great choice. So if you don't have the lenses, and that's fine, absolutely, one of the things you can do is physically move your body closer to your subject. So often there are interesting images and interesting compositions that come from you getting physically close to your subject. So again, be patient. There is no need to rush. Oftentimes we feel as a photographer that if someone is allowing us into their presence, we should be quick, and we should really hurry through that. But you have more time than you think you do. And if you're confident and you're okay with being there and your intentions are good, you really do have some time with your image. So coming closer, looking for those interesting details. People, if they've allowed you to take pictures of them, and I tend to always ask, can I take a picture, or maybe put up my camera and have some kind of connection there, they will let you be in their space, and then you can find the really interesting things. So to that end, the next question is, can you get even closer with your images? What more interesting details can you find? So as you get closer, you can start to look for abstractions. Can you look for patterns, colors, shapes, or textures that make very interesting pictures as elements? Any one of these pictures would look very fascinating, blown up quite large. And nature, I think, gives such a gift of interesting patterns and shapes and textures. There's so much out there. So as you get closer, you will see more. And I will say, a bird's feather is not just a bird's feather. There is something so unique about every bird's feathers, every pattern on a bird's chest, every coloration. It's all unique, it's all different. And so what is it that is interesting about the species or the subject that you have in front of you? Try to hone in on that. I worked as a portrait photographer for 15 years and shoot a lot of families or a lot of weddings, and it sometimes, you know, you're thinking, oh, it's just another family session, but it's not at all like that. Every single family is unique. They have a unique dynamic. They have unique people with unique relationships. So how can you hone on that uniqueness of the family or the subject or the bird, whatever it is in front of you? What is interesting about them? So it's not a picture about a man, it's a picture about this man. So another way you can get closer to your subject is use a macro lens or specialty lens that will magnify your subject and allow you to get closer. And so you can start to really emphasize texture. And anytime you can involve your senses, any one of your senses, you are bringing the viewer more to the image. You're pulling them in because it's a more sensory experience. And another way, maybe not the most ideal way to get a closer, more intimate portrait, is to crop in post-production. This was a slightly more distant crop, but I felt it was a stronger image if I were to pull in. It's not the most ideal method because you are losing data in pixels, but if you are shooting raw and you're using full frame cameras, it tends to be you have some leeway, a little bit of leeway. But obviously, if you can shoot, get what you need while you're shooting, that's the better way to do it. I will say, as much and as powerful as getting closer to your subject can be, also taking a step back is a very, very good thing to do when you're working with a subject. This will give you your subject's context, the environment in which they live, and the way in which they relate to their environment around them. So if you were to put now a close-up shot with this contextual shot, you have so much more of the story, and visual variety between the two images. So we're getting closer, but we're also going further. And as a photographer, your compositions will improve if you start to look for contrast in your scene. Okay, so here's another example. British Columbia, I think we are, and there is a large horned sheep on the mountain. You can barely see it. It's so well camouflaged within its environment. But if we can wait until, or search for places of contrast, the light hitting the goat, or the sheep, excuse me, against the dark background, the light in the dark, now this subject really stands out. So we're not losing the subject in our scene. It now has a little bit more power and impact. In a similar way, we can look for contrast of size. So anytime you have two subjects in your scene, in this case, this infographic, a scuba diver and a whale, you're going to build this relationship between these two subjects. You have one and the other. There's two things in the scene, but how big they appear in the image will change what you're saying about that relationship. And so in the before, they're similar sizes. Obviously, maybe the human is closer, the whale is much further. But in the next picture, in the after picture, you're seeing more of the relative scale between the whale and the human, giving so much more prominence and emphasis on the whale, and also showing, you know, humans maybe are more of our vulnerability in nature. So we can do that as we're roaming around the world. We can look for small people in big environments, in big, you know, beautiful archaeological details, or these wonderful large scenes. We can make sure we have a human for scale. And so emphasizing for contrast in our pictures is a really great idea. And there's so many different types of contrast you can look for. You can look for dark versus light. You can look for a subject that's still when there's motion around, and I'll show some examples of that. Or you can look for a moving subject in stillness. That can be really powerful. Color can be a wonderful way to use contrast. So warm colors versus cool colors. Or complementary colors. A great example here, the color red holds a lot of power with the human beings. You see this with snakes being red and as a signal that they're dangerous, or even women putting on lipstick as a, hey, pay attention to this. Red can be a very big, hey, pay attention to signal in images, so much so that there are people that will purchase red rain jackets because they know they're going to do a lot of photography in green environments. So they know that the power that red or yellows hold. So red can be a really great pull towards. You can also emphasize different size differences, as we just saw, or quantities, many versus one. This duality, this contrast, is very interesting, and it will make your photographs more appealing. So another thing we can do as a photographer to draw our eyes onto our subject, we know our subject what it is, we'll draw our eyes further towards our subject, is to frame our subject. And you see this in galleries all the time. The powerful artwork is framed. It draws our eyes in and it elevates this artwork. This is important, it's saying. So as an example, I saw these, I guess, I don't know what you'd call these natural frames. And I had a bride and groom with me, and I said, hey, can you guys walk to the edge of the pool and just go get something from the other end. And they did, and they walked throughout. And as the bride was going, I called her name so she would look at me. But I did so when she was perfectly framed within this structure. And so this organization that this structure is having on the image, just like cleaning our room, is cleaning this image. So we're looking about how we can organize our space. You're looking in your environment, you're constantly scanning your environment. Is there anything there that I can use to make a more interesting picture? If there's water, you can do a reflection. If there's, you know, whatever it is, each environment will give you something different. So here were a few examples of framed images that I pulled from the internet. I think one of the most powerful one is the central one of the larger fish in amongst the many. You have this beautiful framing of all the fish around this large fish, but you're contrasting size, you're contrasting quantity. It's a very powerful image. So as you are shooting, look around your environment to anything that you can use as a framing element, and then have your subject within those frames. And it can be mirrors, it can be windows, it can be doors, it can be ice structures or rock structures, whatever is in your natural formation. As taking a step back and shooting through things is a really great technique to use, as it makes the viewer feel so much more that they are also immersed in the environment that you are in. So we'll talk just a little bit about leading the eye through the frame and how we can help guide our viewer's eye through the frame using composition. And one of the ways we do that is using lines in our scene to guide the eyes. And the lines can be implied, or they can be very much there in our scene. And here's an example from a famous French photographer, Henri Bresson. And I love this picture because I picture him, you know, climbing up these stairs and sitting in the corner and waiting for what he calls the decisive moment, this moment where some peak action will happen in the frame, and he's waiting for this cyclist to zoom through the frame. But the way he's positioned himself, he has all these natural lines and curves that will guide the eye in addition to the subject guiding the eye. So looking at our environment, what lines can we potentially use to guide the eye towards the subject can be a great way to really control how our viewer moves through the frame. And these were two other examples that I found online of photographers that have seen something in the environment and use that thing to guide the viewer's eyes. And so we see this repetition of converging lines towards the subject in both cases, both using different shapes. And it's interesting because shapes very much have a psychological connotation. You know, when we think of like squares, they are sturdy, they are stable, calming structures. When we think of you know, triangles or rhombuses, they have much more energy, they're more dynamic, they're more, if you put a triangle pyramid upside down, it could fall. There's more tension with triangles. That tension can be really interesting. So shapes and shadow and line, they really help, these elements of art help build our composition. So we can also direct the eyes using focus, where we choose to focus, and the points of sharpest focus on our scene can help guide the viewer's eyes. So human beings will always search for points of sharp focus. Understanding this, we can use this to our advantage. We can blur out using a shallow depth of field. We can blur our foreground and our background, and by doing so, whatever our subject is, it's going to be the sharpest thing, and so the eyes will go there. So for this picture, I was really intentionally standing behind a whole bunch of trees, and this female elk very gently eating. There was a long lens. I was able to get relatively close, and intentionally put myself behind the trees so I can catch some of that foreground interest. The eyes must be sharp. Tic tac sharp here is a little bit off. But the eyes, for a picture to be as strong as possible, the eyes are sharp. So putting your focal point right on the eyes is such a great idea. And if you are a phone shooter and you don't have that technology, there is a way that you can press the screen where, if your screen is pointing to your subject, you press the point in the screen that you want to be sharpest focus, and that will ensure where you want the focus to be is where it is. Okay, and so the focus doesn't have to be on humans, it doesn't have to be on the subject closest to us. This picture is an intimate moment between a man and a woman in France. They're just sitting watching a swan, and so the point of this is their relationship, but the swan. So like their interaction there, and so the focus is on the swan. We have light kind of highlighting the swan itself. So I will say movement in compositions gives so much energy and excitement. So anytime you can play with movement in your compositions, whether it's wind blowing trees or surfers surfing through waves, look for movement. It's people moving, it's animals moving. It makes your images dynamic and makes your viewer feel like they're there with that movement. So here's an example of a panning shot of a surfer in Philippines just driving right on by, and you can actually see that I have some dirt on my lens that I didn't edit out, and it's in front of this guy, these little specks. So being very careful with dirt on your lens now that I'm seeing this a little bit larger. But with panning shots, it is very challenging to get them right. There might be more of trial and error in the sense of you're going to take more shots before you have large successes. But once you kind of get the rhythm of it and you get the speed of your subject matching the speed of your movement with the camera, you can get some really interesting shots. But being very aware of movement in your potential movement in your frame. So for example, if this eider was sitting still and its friend had just started flying away. It was sitting with a group of three eiders, and its friend flew away. So I knew the next bird would likely fly away. And having seen the previous bird and how they took off and how their flight pattern was, I was able to kind of get in the right position and moment for this one. And I like this image because you can kind of hear the sounds of the duck splashing in the water as it takes off. And you can see the water droplets being frozen in time. So any chance that you can play with movement, not only is it so much fun as a photographer, it will make your compositions that much stronger. So I'll talk a little bit about movement, just because it's such a powerful technique. So with a DSLR or mirrorless camera, you have something called the shutter speed, which you can speed up or slow down depending on your choice of shutter speed. You're going to get a different aesthetic choice, and it really relates to motion. So with a fast shutter speed, you are freezing motion. You're getting those kind of safe shots where your subject's sharp in the scene, but then you can, once you have those safe shots, in my opinion, you can start to play with slowing down your shutter speed and maybe moving your camera to see what happens there, and introducing the element of discovery and risk into your images to make maybe more interesting compositions that you couldn't predict. But because they're new, they're fascinating. So here's an example of that. I was drawn to the colors of this scene, but it's pretty bland. There's nothing dynamic. And nothing happening. There's a nice repetition of patterns of these hanging things, but really not so interesting. But with this picture, I was able to take my camera. I had a zoom lens at that point. I set a slow shutter speed, and I zoomed out as I was taking the picture. So you're catching kind of this motion of these. You're catching the energy of the shot. So it's not necessarily a representational shot of what you see in front of you, but more of the mood and the feeling. And these strong colors, these greens and reds being complementary, contrasting colors, gives more energy to the scene. And also this dynamic diagonal, again, more energy. So how can we use motion to capture energy in our images? And I will say, motion is so much fun to play with, but having that patience required for that pinnacle of expression, that decisive moment, maybe where a bird is just dropping a fish out of the sky, and it's a few inches from their mouth. That key moment, you got to be ready for that, and you have to be patient, and you have to take your time. And it's not going to be a quick, I point my camera to the sky and I'm going to get that shot. You're going to have to take your time. Burst mode helps. Paying attention helps. But just being there in the moment, being present in the moment, that's how you're more likely to be able to anticipate these more interesting shots. So there are many, many ways in which you can enjoy movement. Find your moving subject matter, freeze your motion using a fast shutter speed, blur motion using a slow shutter speed. You can play with panning. You can play with that intentional camera movement, whether zooming in or zooming out, or even shaking your camera during a slow shutter speed. Diagonal lines, they hold a lot of power. And then contrasting still versus motion is a really interesting interplay to consider. So as a final little topic, how can we create more depth to our image? And the problem with photography is that it is a 2D medium, but you're trying to capture a 3D world. So how can you make this piece of paper, this print, this screen that is a 2D thing feel like a 3D world? And feel like something that the viewer can come in and enter the scene. So if you look at these two pictures, the picture on the left, this hallway, you feel like you can walk through the hallway deep inside to enter that window or enter that door at the end. There is a depth of that. Contrasted to the scene of this boy by Avedon, it's a flat scene. You can't get into the scene, it's just there. And so we can do things to add depth to our scene, to kind of pull our viewers into our scenes. And what kind of things can we do? Excuse me. One of the things that we can do is ensure that as we're taking pictures, we're considering what's in the foreground, what's in the middle ground, and what's in the background, and making sure that we have maybe elements in each of those grounds, and also making sure that those elements are distinct. And so that kind of pulls apart our image. So it's not just this flat image. We're now entering the scene. We have this, as this example here, this patio, and then going further from the patio, there's this ship, and going behind this ship, there's a piece of land, and going further behind that land is more land, and then water. There are many, many layers to enter this image. And so if there's more depth to our image, we can help our viewer kind of get lost in that image. Including foreground, being very intentional about the foreground elements that we include. You can include out of focus or in focus foregrounds. Out of focus kind of gives you this abstract, more feeling mood to the image, whereas in focus can give you informational details. Sorry. So for example, the scene in Italy, you have obviously the buildings are creating a parallel and these converging lines that are leading you towards these three men having a discussion around the dinner table. And excuse me. And these motorcycles, slightly out of focus, but they give us sense of place and time and lead us into the image, so creating a little bit more depth. Making sure that we have this depth in our images does add intimacy, does add immediacy. It kind of pulls your viewer in as though they were sitting there with you. Makes these images really come to life in that way. And so it's more about the feeling of the images rather than this quick representational shot. And one other example, I find it's absolutely beautiful. Anytime that you see fog or rain or snow or anything hazy in the atmosphere, there's something called atmospheric haze. And it's this idea that the further the object is from the camera, the lighter, less textured and detailed it would be. And so that can be an indication that there's a lot of depth in the scene, because you have a variety of from very detailed, very dark, very textured items in the foreground to less and less and less as you go through the frame. And this could be as simple as, you know, a cobblestone brick sidewalk will get less detailed the further it is into the frame. And those can be great indicators of depth. So definitely shoot anytime you see haze or fog or snow or sleet or any kind of weather. Weather is going to give you really interesting images. So the more you can put your viewer into the scene, the more you can take them with you and place them, the more that they're going to come along in the journey with you, and they're going to want to experience your picture. And I always think of you know, someone coming back from a holiday and they come home and they have thousands of images and they all look the same, and you're trying to convince the person you're sitting with to sit down for an hour and look at the pictures, but every single picture looks the same. And using different compositional ideas and using these things can really start to help you give you visual variety, which will make for much more interesting photographs. And so you hook your viewers in with that. So as a few final thoughts and a few recommendations, we talked a little bit today about how the importance of identifying our subjects and simplifying our scenes, and a few different ways we can emphasize our subjects and direct the gaze around the image. We talked about adding movement and considering depth. So very briefly, we only had about 40 minutes to talk about these things, but these are tools that you can use in your tool belt. But I will say there are so many things that you can consider when you're taking pictures. My hope is that you take one or two and practice it with your own photography and incorporate it with your own shooting. But I will say conditions are very, very rarely ideal, but you can almost always find a beautiful image, no matter what the conditions are. As a final example, here we are on expedition in Colombia, and we're on a conservation project where at the end of the project, they're going to put crocodile back into the ocean. They've rehabilitated some small crocodiles, and they're going to put them back into the waters. And I'm sitting at the back of the boat, as guides often do, and there's maybe 15 people in front of me, and then the man who's going to pull the alligator back in the water. And I have in my mind a vision of what I would love to capture, but I'm far away. There's a lot of things going on in front of me. I can't move. I can't kind of do anything. So I'm kind of stuck where I am. But a big part of photography is that creative problem solving. How do you make the best of what's in front of you? And how do you deal with these difficult lighting situations, or difficult subjects, or subjects that are too far, or there's so much chaos around you? How do you deal with all these factors that all the other photographers also have to deal with? And how do you put your own personal voice and spin on those solutions? And so I don't think this is a good solution at all. This wasn't the photograph to me, but looking around the environment and really considering all the different things that you can utilize, all the different tools that you have to solve these problems will help. And so one thought was, okay, I can't reach the guide on my boat. Can I look for other guides on other boats, and can they tell the story? And with a long lens, to me, these are maybe the more powerful images. With a long lens, I was able to get the moment just as the man was about to release this crocodile into the water, and I did so by hanging off the side of the boat while everyone was much closer to the action. And so this exact precise moment as this crocodile is leaving into the wild, and I think that captures the story of that moment. So final few thoughts. do slow down. There's absolutely no rush. Bring care and intention into every shot that you make, and do think about what it is you're trying to communicate with each photograph. That alone will make your compositions so much stronger. And my top 5 tips, nothing to do with compositional tools, but top 5 tips as a photographer. I think it's so critical that we devour work of other photographers and photographers whose work we admire. I often create what's called a visual treasure chest of photos that I found powerful, and these are my study photos. And I'll analyze these photos. I'll analyze them for technical qualities. I'll analyze them for aesthetics. I'll try to break down. I'll try to understand what the photographer has done and try to understand why they have done that, so that I can have a deeper visual repertoire for myself, so I can understand things better. I'll often also print and study my own work to analyze where I have strengths, where I have weaknesses, and how I can fill those gaps. I think as photographers, we all have Swiss cheese knowledge. We might know a lot, but we all have gaps in our knowledge. And anything we can do to help kind of fill those gaps in will make us a stronger photographer. And so taking that time to intentionally practice those techniques so they become more intuitive and become more natural to us is so important. But I also, as another little note, if you don't have a website or you don't have a portfolio, I would really recommend start to create one, because it's such a beautiful way to analyze your work and to see where you are and maybe see the techniques that you use a lot and see techniques you don't use, and put it all together. I think that's one thing that is remarkable for any photographer to do. Here is a great example of a study folder image. I love this photograph. I think it's such a beautiful composition. The photographer climbed up a building, found a unique angle, has these two like converging lines right to the edge of the scene. It pulls you right in. They're using a great depth of field. So everything in theory is in focus, but because it's a slow shutter speed, you get the passage of motion. You have this interplay of movement and stillness and the scale of the humans to the buildings. I think this is a brilliant photograph. And so I'll sit down and I'll break it down, and then I'll try to pull those techniques into my own, I'll shoot maybe more with a wide angle lens, which I don't enough. And that's a great way to really grow as a photographer. Final thought. We often think of failure and success as opposites. I'm successful or I'm a failure. When in reality, they are very much the same part of the process, and it's only through our failed shots that we get to our successes. So if you are looking to learn more about composition, the absolute genius photographer, educator, writer who talks a lot about composition and breaks it down so well is Michael Freeman. Any number one of these books is brilliant. Michael Freeman, write his name down. He is incredible. And with that, I will thank you, and thank you for spending some time with me. I really appreciate you being here.
Giulia, thank you so much. That was absolutely fabulous. Stunning photo. Are most of those your photographs?
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
Wow, that is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us and your passion and knowledge. I think we all learned a ton. We do have some questions, but I just want to remind everyone before we start the Q&A that you can submit your questions via the questions field in the control panel. So let's start with, what camera system do you use? What are your go-to lenses?
Amazing. So I use the R5. I recently upgraded to an R5. It's a mirrorless Canon camera. My favorite lens, absolute favorite lens, is the 70-200. When I was shooting weddings, I would shoot with a lot more prime lenses, but I find with travel, it's a little bit harder to carry my primes. So I will, in any trip or in any shoot, I will try to give myself the range of lenses, from wide to quite telephoto, but I definitely have some favorites. 70-200 being a big one. 85 as well. I tend towards the telephoto side.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing your secrets. Um, can you address the proper use or how you like to use filters?
Oh, that's a great question. I tend not to use filters except for UV filters. I think a UV filter is critical for every single photographer to protect your camera from damage. That's just like a clear filter that you would screw on top of your lens. And I will say on the side of that, I've had 4 cameras fall, and the UV filter has saved $2,000, $3,000 lenses. It's a $60 filter. Add that to your camera for sure. But in terms of using filters, you know, polarizers you might use to cut down on glare, neutral density filters you might use. Maybe if you want slower shutter speeds during daytime, but I tend to maybe try to do that with, if I want a slower shutter speed, I'm going to shoot maybe on the peripheral of the day when the light is a little bit lower. So I hope that
Okay.
answers. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Um, I'm not sure if I understand this question, but I'm just going to read it as it is, and maybe it will make sense to you. When using in-camera motion, like
Okay.
zooming out, what shutter speed do you use?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll maybe start around 1/30th of a second, and then I'll play from there. So I'll take a few shots. I'll see what kind of results that I'm getting, and then if I want more blur or more motion, I'll slow it down from there. Or if I want a little bit more sharpness, I'll speed it up from there. But I think 1/30th of a second is a decent starting point. Just to talk about panning for a second, say this shot of this man on the surfboard panning, a really great starting point for pan shots and bicycles or motorcyclists is 1/60th of a second. It leads to some pretty good results. And then again, I'll slow down or I'll speed up from there.
Okay. In birding, you often have only seconds to get a shot. How do you take your time?
That's an amazing question. You spend more time birding. I think that's one way will help you get more time birding. But you are absolutely right. Birds are tricky subjects. I do find with birds, if you can understand the patterns of their behavior, how they land, how they take off, where they go to eat, where they go to spend their time, you can spend more time with them. So a little bit more of that natural history knowledge has helped my birding so much. And then just maybe just understanding that I'm going to get many more failed shots when my subject is so much quicker in the frame. Absolutely.
Hmm. One of your final photos with a man on the bike, was that a fisheye? And
Oh,
what did you do to make the photo different in quotes?
okay.
Having trouble finding the right word for that, but it was unusual and eye-catching.
Is it
What did you do there?
Okay, so if it was this one that you're talking about, we were riding a bus and I was quite bored. So I had my camera, I think we were slow shutter speed, so the bus is moving. And I believe during that moment, I also zoomed in or zoomed out with a lens. So I think it was the 24-70 lens, if I remember correctly. This was a couple of years ago. But so I'm using the motion of the bus to propel us forward, but I'm also using a slow shutter speed and pulling in with that. So you're really getting a sense of this like speedy movement into the frame. Oh,
Very cool. Really neat effect. Getting the shot right the first time is always a goal, but what do you often find yourself working on in post-production?
ooh, good questions. I think hmm, that's a really good question. That's going to probably stump me for a while now. Um, I think in post production, I really don't try to do too much. Um, but if I can add feeling or mood to the images by maybe, for example, when I was doing a lot of weddings or family shots, a warmer tint, a little bit of a like a golden glow will give you more of a nostalgic, soft feeling. So a lot of my work there is tinted towards warmer tones or warmer colors. So that would be something that I would do often, but really trying to analyze the mood or the scene, like the mood of the scene, and how can I edit towards that particular mood. I think that would be.
Very cool. Well, I just want to echo the comments here that are just so appreciative of your work and complimentary of your images. Thank you again, Giulia, for bringing us such a fabulous presentation. And I want to thank our viewers for bringing the great questions. I'm always so impressed with the level of knowledge of the folks who show up for these talks. We have such a great audience. So I'm going to pass it back to you for closing comments.
I just thank you all for coming. It really it means a lot that you took your time out of your day to join me to talk about something I love so much. I wish I could see your images as well. Send me some, and thank you so much. Get shooting. I hope this has helped. Maybe even just one technique that you can take with you and start to play with. But photography is so much fun, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. Please join us again next week for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nadhab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everyone.